Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rowing Chat. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today I'm joined by Topher Bordeau. Rowing Chat is the podcast network for the sport of rowing. We have a load of different shows on one website, which is rowing.chat, and you can listen to all sorts of different voices from our wonderful sport. If you're interested in becoming a show host, please get in touch, even if you want to do one show or a discussion with a friend, or you're interested in doing a mini series, or you think you might like to do something continuously and constantly. We really welcome lots of new voices because isn't that the wonderful thing about rowing? There are so many different perspectives. Now, this show would not be possible without the help of our sponsors. And for the month of September, we're sponsored by Faster Masters Rowing. This is a subscription training program for masters athletes written by Marlene Royal and myself, Rebecca Caro. One of these subscriptions that you can take out is to a magazine. This is our description of the program that does not include a training program and does not include a strength and land training program, but has everything else. It includes a technique module, which for the month of September is a doc talk by Marlene Royal, a video 14 minutes long that talks about rhythm and run and how to achieve that in your boat. And Marlene demonstrates this from her single scull. In the performance module, we have a long article about breathing in the rowing stroke, when and how to breathe, and what the purpose of breathing is, which, believe it or not, is not taking in oxygen. We have a lifestyle module, which is about sleep and the importance of sleep as a regenerative process, and a checklist for you to check that you're getting the best sleep. And the bonus module this month is an interview with Dave Frost, who's written a book called Kaboomer, and that is about how to age well as an athlete. So those 4 modules make up the magazine. The cost is $15 a month. And when you join, you will also get the prior month's articles. So you'll get 8 articles for the price of 4. You can find out more at fastermastersrowing.com or go to the sponsors page on the Rowing Chat website, which is rowing.chat/sponsors. And now I'm very pleased to welcome Topher Bordeaux to the podcast. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. So you're a well-known name to me because of my age and generation, but why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your personal background and journey through this wonderful sport of rowing?
Sure. As a former coach, it's hard for me to talk only a little bit, so cut me off if you have to. I've been involved in the sport in a bunch of different ways for a long time. I suppose since the age of 12, which I'm not going to say how many years that is, but it's a lot of them. I started rowing in school outside of Boston at a place called Belmont Hill. Like a lot of rowers, I started rowing because I was looking for something to be good at, and it definitely was not going to be football or basketball. And then from there, I went on to row at Princeton and had some really wonderful coaches in Mike Teti and Curtis Jordan, and some incredible teammates, and was there for a time of great success. I was lucky enough to win the IRA 3 times, once as a freshman and twice in the 2V. And I won the sprints 3 times as well in the 2V, which I suppose is a little bit like being the minor league home run king in baseball. But just had a lot of great crews and was part of a lot of great crews thanks to a lot of wonderful people that I got to row with. And I should add that the team won the national championship in 1996 and 1998. And so it was just an incredibly rewarding experience. And predictably enough, I wasn't quite ready for rowing to end after college. So I went to the UK for a year and rowed in the ISIS crew at Oxford. Sadly, in a losing boat race experience, but it was still, I still to this day remember the moment, sitting there on the tideway on the starting line with a helicopter overhead and all those people shouting. Just before we dug the blades into the water to go, I remember thinking, like, this might be the most exciting moment of my life. And sadly, the race went downhill from there. But it was still something special. After that, I was out of the sport for a few years, and I just started volunteer coaching. I got a call from my old high school coach. I was working in Boston. I was out of the sport. I was a writer. But he asked if I was willing to coach at Belmont Hill. And excuse me. And so I did. And I helped out for a spring. And my crews had some success. And I was actually at Mike Teti's wedding when Joe Murtagh, who was the lightweight coach at Princeton when I was rowing there, kind of we were chatting and catching up, and he had heard that I had got back into coaching and was curious if I had ever thought about coaching professionally. Push comes to shove, and I thought, okay, I'm going to be the Princeton freshman lightweight coach, and it was going to be a one-year thing. It was going to be a break from writing. This was right after the .com bubble had burst, so it was a tough time to be a writer. But I enjoyed coaching so much at Belmont Hill that I thought, why not take a shot at coaching collegiately? I learned so much in that first year that I thought I have to come back for a second year. The second year was amazing. The next thing I knew, I'd been there for a bit and was ready to look for a next step. And so I was the freshman heavyweight coach at the Naval Academy for a year. And I'm not sure if there's a bigger change in the sport of rowing from Princeton University to the United States Naval Academy, from Lake Carnegie to the Severn River, from a lot of really experienced elite talent coming into your program at Princeton to a lot of extraordinarily motivated, incredibly athletic novices coming into the program at the Naval Academy. And it was amazing. It was the first time I felt like a true professional coach, because the way things were done at Navy was so different than the way I had always known at Princeton. And it was just such an exhilarating experience to test my ideas and to experience these very different ideas. And had a lot of fun there. But then life took me up to the upper valley of Vermont and New Hampshire. And I became an assistant coach at Dartmouth College for a year. And then a year later was hired as the varsity heavyweight rowing coach at Dartmouth. At the time I was hired, the team was in a pretty tough spot. They had been 24th at the IRA the year before I was hired. And I remember distinctly when I told my mom that, I'd gotten a job, as only a mother can, she said, "Topher, this is terrific. You could completely screw them up and nobody would ever know this." I tested that idea because, in my first year on the job, we were 24th again. And I think that 23rd was closer to first place than we were to 23rd place. And that was challenging, but I was very fortunate, and I'm very grateful to have worked with a lot of the most committed people you could ever hope to have on a team. And those were the people who came back that year after the team had finished 24th twice in a row. And that following year, we made a huge jump that probably only the fans of the Dartmouth rowing program noticed. We went from 24th to 15th. And then the next year, I think we were 12th, and then we were 8th. And it was a lot of fun, those first 4 years, 5 years even on the Dartmouth program. Along the way, I got to coach a little bit for the United States under-23 national team. Just having a relationship with Mike Teti helped with that, and with Michael Callahan. And in 2007, in the summer of 2007, we combined to host the U23 team in Hanover, and we got 4th at the World Championship, which was profoundly unsatisfying. But then the following year in 2008, we hosted the camp again and took the crew to Brandenburg and won. And so that was a really nice coda to that. Then I coached at Dartmouth until 2014, and I would say the last 3-ish years of my coaching career there were really challenging personally and professionally. The crazy thing about coaching rowing and being in a leadership position like that is that, the moment you're not fully both committed and convinced of what you're doing, I think your crew consciously or subconsciously can sense it. And, shortly after my wife and I welcomed our second child into the world, I remember thinking that coaching might not be in my long-term future. And just the realities of recruiting. And, I remember it was a wonderful experience, but also challenging. My wife and I took my then 3-year-old daughter and my second daughter, who was not yet born yet, to the UK and to South Africa recruiting. And it was completely crazy and completely fun. And I remember changing diapers in a game preserve. And, but just, the crazy thing is just realizing that was not sustainable. The results started to suffer. And then I knew I wasn't in coaching for the super long term. The people I worked for at Dartmouth, who are terrific people and good leaders and made difficult decisions, which is what good leaders did, made the tough decision not to renew my contract in 2014. And so I found myself out of the sport, and I've been following it since then. But that's pretty much the extent of my background in the sport.
Well, that's an amazing summary, because by your own admission, you've had a couple of nice, easy segues into fun things because you knew people and you'd worked with them, or as an athlete, or you knew them, which is often the way that rowing goes. But then also to end your career in such a, I suppose, definitive way, with a decision not made by yourself.
Yep. And
with no clear follow-on opportunity. That's not unusual, but it's very unusual to hear someone talk about it. So thank you very much for raising it, because a lot of us do end our careers and fade away.
Yeah. I mean, it's, failure is such a productive part of rowing, and rowing teaches people so much about their lives that I've always been surprised that there's less writing about failure in rowing, and there's less discussion of it. I forgot to mention that I worked for Rowing Magazine as a correspondent for 8 years. And Chip Davis gave me the chance to write. Ed Winchester made my writing much, much better. And I became fairly close with both of them. And I had for the longest time, been annoying them about maybe having a column about just writing about the tough things in rowing. And I never found a way to write about like quitting or failure in a way that I imagine advertisers would want to be part of. But it's a subject that I think makes us all human. It's such a part of rowing. It's such it's such a teaching aspect of the sport. And so it's, and also, to be incredibly honest and somewhat selfish, I was and remain a competitive person. And so to have lost that opportunity, it forces a person to do some thinking. And my friends will tell you that I'm really good at overthinking just about anything.
So perhaps not using yourself as an example, but what are the stages that someone goes through when confronted with a situation that could be interpreted as failure? Is it like the 5 stages of grief?
That's a good question. I think failure is incredibly personal. And I think a lot of things that many people would perceive as success, some people will perceive as failure. And the example that immediately comes to mind is the silver medal winner at the Olympics in any event. I think there have been many studies that have shown that bronze medal winners looked back on their Olympic experiences much more fondly than silver medal winners do, because there's a perception among many silver medal winners that they failed to win gold, whereas the bronze medal winner is happy to have won a medal.
And not come forth.
I'm sorry?
And not come forth.
Yeah. Fourth is the worst. One of my college teammates used to call that the wood medal. And nobody wanted it. But, I think failure is a really personal topic, but I think it might be universal that all of us, when we confront our own failures, first reject the premise behind the ideas that led to our failure. I think everybody loses their way at some point in what they're doing, but it's hard to admit that. And it's especially hard to accept that. It's hard to accept that, okay, this didn't work out because I made a few bad choices, or I made choices that didn't have great reasons. And those are two very different things. So I think it's personal, and I think it's hard to ascribe like a general reaction or process to it.
Let's dig into those two different things. So what's the difference between I made bad choices or I made bad choices due to different reasons?
Yeah, so I think, and to be clear, I think the worst kind of leader is not one who makes bad choices, but one who makes no choices. And that can result from fear over what happens if you do make a bad choice. So, it's easier to avoid that fear and make no choice. But I think making a bad choice might be a choice that is driven by emotion. I think emotion is the opposite of reason. A bad choice would usually be reactionary rather than responsive. I think there's a difference between reacting and responding. Again, I think that's many reactions are emotional. Most good responses are rational. So there's a difference between those things. I think bad choices tend to be things we regret. I think, choices that were made, that didn't work out because the reasons weren't good. Because the reason behind the decision-making wasn't sound. I think those are forgivable. And I think we would do really well to forgive ourselves for those things, because none of us have, or it's very rare that any of us have all the information we need to make a really confident choice, especially in a leadership position like coaching, where there are so many ambiguous factors and you have so many people, so many committed people looking at your decisions. It's tough to have all the information. And at the same time, you do the best you can with the information you have. And if the decision doesn't work out, then that was a bad choice. And it was made for, incomplete reasons. But it's not a bad choice. It's not regrettable. It's just I should say it's not a bad choice. It's just an unfortunate choice.
And of course, this year is a really good year for reflecting on things like that. We are very aware of very imperfect information as a prelude to making a decision.
Yes.
But one of the things that, as you age, and sorry to sound really boring about this, is that you do see patterns of behavior and choices, but you also realize that you actually have fewer years to try something different. And I think that also constrains your future decision making. When you're young, you're like, that's cool. I've got another Olympiad. I've got 4 years. I'll go beyond Tokyo. I'll go to Paris. I'll go to Los Angeles. And then you realize that that's not always possible or likely. And that makes your decision making somewhat different.
Yeah. I mean that's all of a sudden we just started thinking about mortality. And I think as I reflect on this idea within the context of coaching and naturally think about it within the lens of my own experience, I think that the second a coach avoids a decision just because it's something new is the moment that coach's career, A, becomes less satisfying and B, becomes more in jeopardy. I think the fact that we have a limited number of decisions remaining in our career as a coach or as an athlete or as a professional or a person, the fact that we have a limited number of decisions remaining is a really good reason to try something new, because all of the wisdom that we've accrued during our past decisions, all of the mistakes we've made in our own training as an athlete, or in our own coaching as a coach, all of those things, consciously or subconsciously, go into every decision we make going forward. And, I think a new decision represents an evolution of thinking, whereas an old decision represents a reversion towards comfort. And so, I think that this is something I've thought about a lot in my own, like reflecting on my own coaching career. And I think we might talk later, but when I talk to current coaches, a lot of the work is encouraging people to have the courage to just keep making new decisions and pursuing new ways of doing things.
It's a really good point that you make there. Years ago, when the internet was young, there was a trend for writing manifestos. And I wrote one called the Advice and Guidance Manifesto, and it was entirely motivated by reflecting on two extremely good coaches, both of whom I know, and sadly, both of whom are now dead. So one of them was Harry Mahon, who is a New Zealander who coached very successfully overseas in Switzerland and in the UK and South Africa. And he was incredibly generous with his ideas. You could ask him anything and he would give you a good answer as best he could from his knowledge. The other was a man called Ron Needs, who was an extremely successful women's coach in the UK and was on the British national team coaching for years. He coached at my university as well. And Ron was really closed with his advice and insight. And you could ask him things and you would barely get an answer. And the contrast between these two was brought to me to the front of mind at the time when I was sharing a flat with Harry. So I could ask him anything anytime, and we'd often talk long about lots of things. And I went to a conference where part of the conference was to encourage coaches to get into a huddle with an experienced coach and to ask them anything they wanted. And I didn't get insights, examples, anecdotes from Ron that I had hoped I was going to. And so I started to form this idea in my mind. What if I could download everything that's in Topher Bordeaux's mind right now, today, and I would have it, here within my grasp? And my reflection on it was this, that even if I could do that, it is no threat to Topher the coach. No. Why? Because the second after that download is completed, his synapses are making new connections, formulating new ideas based on his experience, and taking his own thinking forward. And my thinking, including obviously my download of his, is going to go in a different direction out of necessity because I am not you. Yep. And for me, the outcome of this is, therefore, there actually is no threat to an experienced coach sharing what they can and what they've done and what they know with an inexperienced or less experienced coach, right? Or even a rival coach, to be perfectly honest. Because if you have confidence in your own ability, you will still move forwards.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I love that thinking. And I can't help but note that anybody who has spent any significant time in the sport of rowing or is any kind of a student of the sport knows who Harry Mahon is and knows his influence. I had never heard of Ron. And, I can't help but reflect that some of those, they were both successful. And one is really widely known, and the other, at least to this American, was not known. And every coach cares about the sport. And Harry left an undoubtedly positive influence on the sport. And so I have to think that part of it is because he was so forthcoming and sharing in what he had learned.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I want to move on to talk to you about your current job, where you spend a bit of time recruiting for a lot of different sports for Dartmouth College. Every young athlete knows the challenge of filling out an application form and, trying to get recruited. What's it like from the other side of the table?
It's every bit as challenging. So yeah, just to fill in some context there, I have done a few things since coaching, both of them in higher education. I worked as a fundraiser for a small college in northern Vermont while also going to business school for a bit. But currently, for the past, I'm in my fourth year now. I work in the Dartmouth College admissions office, and some of the work I do, I guess, could be called recruiting, in that I represent the college to prospective students in specific parts of the world, specifically India and the Middle East, and then Long Island and Philadelphia in America. And so I spend part of my time each year going out and meeting students all over the world and telling them about higher education in America and at Dartmouth specifically. And then in other times of the year, I read their applications and say no to many more qualified students than I would prefer to say no to. Part of my job also is I'm an athletic liaison, which means that I work with, I think, 5 of Dartmouth's varsity sports, not rowing. I don't work with the rowing teams, but I help those coaches basically vet the athletes that they're recruiting, to basically assess their qualification for a place like Dartmouth. And so, as many of your listeners and followers probably know, the athletic recruiting cycle happens well in advance of the application cycle. Students will apply to U.S. universities for early decisions starting November 1st, but the recruiting period happens well in advance of that. And so coaches need to know if these athletes that they're really excited about are viable from an admissions perspective. And part of my job is working with our coaches in a few sports to give them a sense of how viable the students they're looking at are. And it's very challenging. Dartmouth is an extraordinarily selective university, much like many of the schools that are involved in the rowing world. And it is my job to make decisions on very, very, very fine criteria. It's not unlike selecting a crew, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's challenging. I vividly remember they don't do recruiting at the university I went to, but I had an admissions interview for my subject, and then I had a general interview with someone who was basically there to see whether or not my personality, my skill set, my interests would fit in with college life. And I remember having, of course, being a good student, prepared a question in advance. And I asked them what difference it would make if someone had a relative who had previously attended the college, because I didn't, but I just wanted to know, is this a level playing field, I suppose, is what I was asking. And I remember him choosing his words very, very carefully and basically saying, if it came down to the wire and there was absolutely no other way in any other aspect that we could divide 2 students and we only had one place, yes, we might bring that into consideration, but fundamentally means nothing, was really what he was saying.
Okay. Yeah.
What are the things that you find bring you to those close considerations? This is the sort of the general attributes of the students. Show us the difficult side of your job.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Thankfully, it's not just me making the decision. Virtually all of the decisions we make are made collectively. It's very rare that the entire admissions committee will weigh in on a single decision, but it's also very rare that a decision is made by one person. So, I couldn't say, okay, this person's admitted, and then that's done, they're admitted. But I think, I think my colleagues and I, demonstrated academic achievement is something we look for, and that's like table stakes at the game. And there's so many exceptional students out there. This year will be especially challenging because at least my employer, like a lot of institutions, has gone test optional. So we will be reading applications from a lot of students who don't have the SAT or the ACT. And then also many of those students will have transcripts from their junior spring where they don't actually have marks. They don't have grades because a lot of high schools in America and around the world just elected not to give grades. But so demonstrated academic achievement would be like the bread and butter. I think we look for engagement, in a student's community. And that is purely a recognition of the fact that so much of the learning that happens in a university setting happens outside of the classroom. And so we want to know that students are going to be engaged outside of the classroom. The best indicator of that is them being engaged outside of the classroom in high school. Certainly involvement in a sport qualifies as that. Many students will bring 2 or 3 substantial activities, a sport and a play or the school newspaper or student body president or whatever. Beyond those things, it gets a little bit tougher to define, but it's something you kind of know it when you see it. I think as students, like intellectual qualities and personal qualities are things we pay attention to. By intellectual qualities, I mean, like, what does it look like when a student totally geeks out about something? Like, we celebrate that in the environment I work in. And like, we want to know what it looks like when students geek out. That's kind of a good summary or paraphrase of their intellectual qualities. I think their personal qualities, what do they care about? What are their values and their aspirations, and how do they articulate those values, and how do they pursue those aspirations when they get excited about something personally? What does that look like? I think that the value that we place on that is a recognition that students are going to be part of a community, and we're not just building bunches of people that go to class. We're building communities, and so we want a bunch of different voices in that community.
That's so interesting, because you have immediately brought to mind another part of that one interview that I recall about geeking out. And the topic, as it happened, was chosen by me and immediately jumped on by the interviewer. And I was talking about how words that are misspelled jump out of the page at me. And I particularly said Americanisms, because, of course, American English is spelled differently from English. And he leapt on that. As it happened, I later found that he was in the English faculty. So, of course, as it happens, that was his subject of choice. And he dived into me and he said, yes, how do you spell embarrass and how do you spell harass? And I, of course, immediately went, oh my gosh, I wasn't ready for a spelling bee.
That was a serendipitous interview. And I would also say that I was an English major in college. I geek out over words and language. And I hear you. Americans have done something to English. I'm not sure how good it is, but yeah.
I will say, for the record, I got them both wrong, and it's about double R's and double S's. And he roared with laughter and said, oh, that doesn't matter. I was like, I'm guessing in the back of his mind, he was thinking, I guess she knows how to use a dictionary.
Right.
Now, your insights into what it takes to form rounded human beings seems to me to be the unifying theme that straddles your personal career, your coaching career, and now your current recruiting and sporting liaison career. And could we say that that's sort of encapsulated in a philosophy?
Yeah, I don't know what the philosophy would be. I've never heard somebody put it that way, but I think it's apt. Like building a class at a university, Dartmouth has 1,150-ish students per class. It's not fundamentally different than building a team. And I suppose in both, to be very clear, the prime decision maker in building the class at Dartmouth is a few pay grades above me. But I think that one of the things that makes him very good at his job and makes him a really good leader and makes him a really good colleague is that it's clear that he has a philosophy to the way he does his work. In much the same way, I think a good coach will have a philosophy articulated, perhaps just to herself, but certainly a philosophy that guides her work. I think if there were a philosophy that has guided my career, it's a curiosity for people and how they develop. I think if there was a a philosophy that guided my coaching career. It was something like that combined with enthusiasm. I remember my very first coaching boss, who I mentioned earlier, Joe Murtagh, who was the head coach of the Princeton lightweight team when I was the assistant coach there. Very early in my coaching career, made the point to me that, your coaching philosophy is who you are. And to be totally candid, and initially when he said that to me, it made me uneasy. Perhaps because I was 24, 25 at the time and had even less sense then of who I was than I have now. And so deriving a philosophy from who I was daunting. But I do think that, looking back on my own coaching career, and then just to give some context to this, since coaching, I mentioned that I went to business school, and I went to a different kind of business school. I was at a small college in Vermont, and the program, it was an MBA for mission-driven organizations. And so the program was much less about finance and numbers and much more about the nuts and bolts of leadership for nonprofit organizations or for other mission-driven organizations. And so much of my coursework in that MBA program was about things, especially about leadership and management, that they were just things that coaches naturally had to be at least competent in. And I would say most coaches probably could have taught the course. And so, it occurred to me during that experience, and it occurred to me leading a fundraising effort for that small college in northern Vermont, that having a philosophy to guide you is incredibly important, and that's been a big part of the work I've done kind of outside of my day job since then.
That's absolutely fascinating, because while you were talking then, I was trying to think through what I might call my coaching philosophy. And I'm beginning to think that I'm very oriented towards what I would call community sports, which means, if I'm being really blunt, high participation, low achievement. Having said that, this is about us sharing the fun, sharing the love, becoming a bunch of people you want to hang out with and see outside of rowing, but also finding achievements and demonstrating a pathway. And one of the things that I find fascinating in coaching adults is how different it is from coaching children. So I used to coach in rowing a bunch of 10 to 14-year-olds. And fundamentally, my job there was make it fun and make sure they are safe physically and don't do something dumb, because they were all perfectly capable of doing something dumb. And that was fine, because they loved competing, but it was little mini kind of races against each other, and they were hugely competitive, but it was more about the participation. And then coming into adults, particularly adults over the age of 40, how adults learn is so different from children. They have an hideous judgmental attitude. They have a massive fear of failure. If you're teaching a child to skip with a rope or to ride a bicycle that goes off, up a plank, and then you're going to, fly through the air for, a foot or two, a child will do that without questioning, also probably without realizing they're not going to be on the ground for a short period of time, whereas an adult will see it in a really different light. And of course, learning, let's say, to scull in a single on your own is massively challenging. Full stop. Plus, you might go swimming, you might flip, plus the humiliation factor, plus all sorts of other things. Keep your mouth shut underwater is really good advice. But it's giving courage to other people to try something new and different is incredibly difficult. And it is, I think, probably the heart of my personal coaching philosophy.
That's interesting. I love that philosophy. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, just your comparison between the way kids and adults learn brings me back to this notion of there's unconscious incompetence, where you don't know that you don't know what you're doing.
Oh, yes.
conscious incompetence where you do know that you don't know what you're doing. And I think adults feel that much more than kids. But, you know, I think that you know, just getting people comfortable trying new things and taking risks, you know, it can be incredibly powerful. And, you know, I don't row much anymore. Like I own an ergometer and I get on it when I don't have time to run on trails or ride my bike. But, you know, I've gotten big into the sport of trail running in the past 10, 15 years. And I think I had a few coaches who were a little bit like you, where kind of they gave the courage to take a risk or just try, not even take a risk, just try something new without feeling like it's a risk. And, you know, one of the reasons I started rowing was because I hated running. And yet since then, you know, since meeting up with this club and meeting these influencers in the sport, you know, I've run 50 miles a couple times and run 100K a few times. And it's just who knew? And so I think that approach can be incredibly powerful and good for you for divining that.
Well, I think I'm probably only still working it out, but certainly you've helped me articulate. You know, listening to you talk, you know, it was going through the back of my mind, well, what's mine and what does that mean? And what are the things that give me the most satisfaction? Because I think that might be a good clue as to what your coaching philosophy is. Because if your satisfaction is summiting Everest, then anything that doesn't contribute to a really high achieving outcome is probably not going to be satisfying for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, you know, it's funny, I've just kind of happened onto a small consultancy where, you know, I work with coaches to do that, to like help them figure out their own coaching philosophy. And again, to give some context, it started out, one of my projects for business school was to advise an educational technology company on how to articulate their value proposition to potential clients. And I knew nothing about ed tech. I certainly didn't know much about their business, but just listening to them talk about what they did and why they did it and what they thought their talents could bring to their clients, that helped me help them articulate their value. And that project went really, really well, well enough that they had mentioned their experience to one of their friends who was starting another startup, and said, "Hey, can I refer you to them?" And I said, "Sure." And so I started advising these very small stage companies just on how to articulate their value or their value proposition. And after 5 or 6 such engagements, you know, I realized that the lessons I was sharing from business school were lessons that would have helped me a lot if someone had said them to me when I was struggling as a coach. And it was kind of ironic because, you know, I couldn't have said them to myself because when I was struggling as a coach, I probably lacked the confidence to follow through on my own lessons. But had someone outside of me, had someone like a consultant that someone had hired said that to me, it would have been really empowering. And I didn't do much with that thought until the nephew of a friend. So my friend's nephew was in their second or third season coaching and having a tough time. And my friend just said, "Hey, can you talk to my nephew?" And I said, "Sure." And you know, there's this moment where I just like all these business school lessons apply to coaching in ways that coaches probably don't even know. And so it's been really, I love this subject of coaching philosophy, and I enjoy talking to you about it because I've gotten to talk to a lot of coaches about it. And like I have this small consultancy now where I help them figure out their own coaching philosophy and how to apply it to the situation they're in. And it's just really, really interesting. I think it's a way to engage in this sport that feels kind of like a third chapter. You know, I was a rower, I was a coach. I'm really not much of either right now. I don't know what I would call this, but I know it's very interesting.
I think you're a mentor, and I'm going to ask you for a free piece of consultancy. So imagine you're in front of a new client who's a coach who's, let's say, struggling, or seeking a path. What's the first thing you get them to start thinking about?
Yeah, I asked them to, I would ask them to start thinking, or I'd ask them to share with me what was the first thing they loved about rowing. The very first thing. And, it can be as simple as I didn't have to run. Again, that was the first thing I loved about rowing. And I think what's hidden in that a statement like that, a response like that, is a desire to be really good at something and a belief that this could be the thing that person is good at. Because, like, I loved rowing because I didn't have to run. Okay, I like not having to do something is not a reason to love something else. But, if there's a belief that someone can be successful, like that's enticing. And then the next thing I would ask them is, what's the most recent thing you love about rowing? And invariably, that question will person, they will share the thing they love most recently. But then what's really interesting is unprompted, they will chart a path from A to B, from the first thing to the last thing. And that almost gives like a biography of the way they think about the sport.
Now, that's interesting because post-rationalization is an incredible human skill. We like to have a story. We like to have a coherent story that goes through certain stages and steps. And as we've already discussed, not everybody's story is the hero's journey, like the Matrix of the, I didn't realize there was a Matrix out there, and then you become the hero of the Matrix. Most of us see outcomes and want to feel that we can backwards justify, rationalize what we've done. And yet I vividly remember a very successful athlete who I rowed with, who off the water had a long standing pattern of career behavior where she would start a new career every couple of years. She could never settle to anything, never advance beyond. She was clearly very, very comfortable in a beginner position in yet another different business or yet another different industry. And she wasn't dumb. She just, for me, that was like, that's not a career path. That's let's go back to the beginning again, and let's go back to the beginning again. And yet, of course, I think I was dissatisfied. It wasn't my life. And so it wasn't for me to, impose it on her. But I realized that the reason I found it dissatisfying was I couldn't see a narrative, a thread.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like the idea of I forget if you said like backwards rationalizing or whatever, but I think we all, to our own strength and our own detriment, have a sense of what our narrative is and perhaps an attachment to that narrative. I think what your friend was really good at, that many of us are not good at, is the idea of recognizing that a narrative has chapters. Like the really good books we read, it's very rare that it's one scene from beginning to end. But I think it's very difficult in our own lives to recognize the delineation between chapters. We feel this internal pressure, especially for motivated people, which I think rowing tends to attract in droves. We feel this pressure to have every little thing in our lives lead to something next. And that can get in the way of the idea that sometimes we just change direction and sometimes we start a new chapter. And then also it gets in the way, or it's somewhat short-sighted because neither you nor I nor anybody watching or listening to this are dead yet. And so we have a future in front of us and we don't know where that's going to be. On the one hand, by definition, the fact that our lived experience will lead to our future experience, by definition, those two stories are tied together. But like we have the ability to kind of set our different chapter, and that can be, as an athlete, that can be shifting between training models, whether it's like the Australian volume model versus the Danish intensity model. It can be shifting between coaching philosophies. It can be shifting between any number of different things. I think your friend was really good at seeing those possibilities in a way that many, many, many of us aren't. And when I work with coaches, a lot of my work is actually just convincing them that like not only is change okay, not only is a new chapter okay, but a new chapter is good and necessary. Maybe you want to rewrite the book or reinvent the wheel every time you do it. It's best if, as we talked about earlier, it's best if all of the wisdom from your previous decisions tie into your next decision. But starting something different doesn't mean you're starting something over.
That's important because, as you politely said, driven people have a need to keep moving forwards. That is, I think, part of the definition. And I had a period 18 months, 2 years ago, where a situation happened. It wasn't fully imposed on me, but it wasn't something that I initiated. And it happened, and I let it happen. And it took me fully 18 months of not quite, but nearly downtime, not to rationalize it, but to recognize the attributes of the new chapter. And I almost think now that I might be moving out of that chapter. I'm not sure, but it's very, very hard to identify. And it took me more than 6 months before I could even talk about it in public.
Yeah.
And particularly I'm going to use the word alpha male because it's, the sort of alpha type personalities. The narrative that alpha types use is of continuous forward movement. And yet we both know that that is not the whole truth, and that everybody massages their biographies on LinkedIn and their CVs. And, you don't need to come clean about everything except to yourself. And I think that sort of learning is something that is not often taught or realized.
Yeah. I talk about this so much with people. Yeah. With the coaches I work with. And, in nature, sharks have to keep moving or else they'll die. And because of that, I don't know that I've ever heard about a school of sharks. Like a marine biologist would know more about this than I would, but the shark that's always moving and always hunting, which I think is the ultimate extrapolation of this alpha mentality that you're talking about. That shark is moving and always hunting, but it's alone, and I don't know how much of that shark's past life is impacting its future. This is ridiculous because here I am, like putting myself in the head of a shark. But at the same time, it's interesting. Like this is the idea that thinking about how to make boats go fast can lead to this kind of thinking, where I'm sitting here in the head of a shark and I'm inviting you into the head of a shark. I think the willingness to take intellectual risks and to pursue different and ridiculous ideas is really valuable in our sport. Really valuable.
It really is. And, at a really trivial level, we all know that when you're seating an 8, you have different personalities in some of those different seats in the 8. You have different skill sets, different attributes. The stroke is not the same as the 7. The bow is not the same as the 3. And in fact, that's part of the skill of building a good crew, leadership, creating a great environment that works for as many people as possible.
Yeah. And I would add to that everybody, I don't think there's a rower out there who has only sat one seat in his or her entire life. Yeah. So, people can sit different seats. People can change. People can be the stroke seat or the bow seat. And coaches can do the same thing. Coaches can be like a stroke seat kind of coach or a bow seat kind of coach. And the idea that a rower is only going to be one thing in her entire career is inherently limiting. If you're the rower and you say, "Oh, I'm only a stroke," well, I guess in a pair you can sit in 50% of the seats, but in an 8 you can sit in 12% of the seats. That's limiting. And we both know that a lot of the fun in the sport, like if you've ever gone from stroke seat one practice to bow seat the next practice, that second practice might have been like the most fun practice of your entire life because it's just so different being on the tip of the spear. And it is inherently the change that makes it interesting and joyful. And that's why I find it so ironic that so many coaches, myself included, were resistant to that kind of change.
It's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you, Topher. Tell the listeners a little bit about where they can connect with you and find out a bit more about your work as can I call you a mentor of coaches?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to be clear, I've mentioned I have clients. The way it works is like, I mentioned, when I read applications in my day job, I want to learn what it looks like when somebody geeks out about something. I geek out about this. I geek out about a lot of things. I'm fascinated by higher education and the challenges facing it in this new world. But I remain fascinated by how people coach. And so the way my little consultancy works is people just get in touch with me and we chat and I offer them advice. And if it's valuable, they pay me what they think it's worth. And I don't, if it's nothing, that's fine. I invariably enjoy talking to them. And if it's something, that's great, because then I've given them something of value. But the way they can get in touch with me, I'm Topher Bordeau at gmail.com. I don't have a website. I don't have anything sophisticated. I would say this is, mentor is a word that, I don't feel like smart or accomplished enough to be. I think of the mentors in my own life, and it's like, no, okay, I'm at a different level. I just like to help people think about the way they coach. But yeah, Topher Bordeau at gmail.com is the best way to get me.
Thank you so much for your generosity, for your insight into challenges that we all face, and many of us are fearful of articulating in public. I have hugely enjoyed our conversation here on Rowing Chat.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Please subscribe to Rowing Chat. You'll find it in any of the podcast software downloads. Please write us a review, or if you just do one thing, share this episode with one other person who you think might be interested. I'm Rebecca Caro, and till next time, bye-bye.